How you going everyone? This is the first devlog of my new game with the working title, Wombatvania. I had an idea for a game that I could hopefully make in 2 weeks or so. A 2D platformer with only one level, but you acquire upgrades in the form of suits that help you access other parts of the level to get more upgrades and so on. Basically a mini Metroidvania. Our protagonist is a wombat, an adorable marsupial that lives in the grasslands, forests and mountainous areas of Australia, and is shaped like a friend. They may seem roly-poly, but these fun-sized furballs are strong and quick. But their unassuming, lovable appearance made them the perfect choice of animal for this game. I imagined adding scuba gear and jetpacks to these huggable herbivores and giving them the power they deserve. Alright, let's get into it. I created a new Unity project and started to get a white square moving around on the screen as per usual. I'd previously used copy and pasted movement code for this slapdash platformer I'd made in a few days for a uni assignment a year or so ago, but I wanted to do all the movement code from scratch this time. Okay, so I've got it moving left and right. 10 seems a little low for the acceleration though. I'll just quickly change those values okay. I'll try again with it set at 50 from the start this time. Okay, something's wrong somewhere. Wait, maybe if I reload it, it'll just fix it, so alright. Okay, it's at least not flying off this time. That's progress. That jittery sliding is annoying though. I don't think I'm actually stopping the character. That's more like it. It's way too slidey though. Let's crank up that acceleration again. And there we go, it's officially a game character. It can even jump, technically. Although at this point they don't actually need to be on the ground to jump. Also, I was adding a force to the character object's rigid body instead of directly altering its Y velocity, so it was fun to just make it fly around like this. I wanted to give the square a little wombat sprite to help visualize everything before refining the movement anyway, so I moved on from the movement code to draw some wombats. I found a few reference images of side-on wombats online and started to get into it. This is definitely starting to look more like a bear than a marsupial. The wombat's closest relative is actually the koala. Interestingly, they both have backwards facing pouches, which is especially helpful for wombats so they don't get dirt in them when digging their little burrows. Look at this little Joey. I finished the quick first draft, which still looked quite bearish, and started on refining the proportions and details on its clone. I played around with bigger, more cartoony eyes later on, but I felt that Wombat's small eyes are one of their distinct features. Unfortunately, they also have poor eyesight, but they apparently more than make up for it with their keen sense of smell. Just look at these noses. I then tried out different poses for their heads to see which one I could actually convey as a wombat. These are the different versions I got for this round. The first one's face freaks me out a bit now. I see it when I close my eyes at night. The second one's face looks somehow even more like a bear than the first one. I don't even know what happened there. But the third one was just right for Goldilocks, though their legs were a little long and the shading on their abdomen was scuffed. I ended up with this beanbag after the first round of drawing, which I was pretty happy with for now, even though they're only going to be like this big on the screen anyway. I decided it came out looking like a northern hairy-nosed wombat, one of the 3 living species of wombat in Australia. The common bare-nosed wombat tends to be the face of the family, but I've since learned that due to food shortages, droughts and predators, the northern hairy-nosed wombat is critically endangered, with only around 400 individuals left on Earth. 400. Fortunately, that number is currently rising at a steady rate, but I'll come back to that. Animating the Wombat was interesting since there's not a whole heap of clear footage of them running side on. I found this 480p YouTube video from 12 years ago. It shows a section where the Wombat was side on for at least one run cycle, paused the video, screenshot every blurry frame of the cycle, pulled them into Paint and flipped them so they match my sprite. The run cycle was luckily almost exactly 8 frames, so I just chose every second frame and started posing my character sprite into those 4 pixelated blobs. This was the run animation after the first iteration, which looked good enough for now. Of course, it'll be sped up in the game since these scamps can scamper up to 40 km an hour. Since I was on a bit of a roll art-wise, I decided to add a few simple ground sprites to add a little colour to the world. Please excuse the quality of the next few parts of the footage. I accidentally messed around with some settings in OBS. It'll change back soon, relax. I even designed an Australian grass tree to see how the flora would look in different styles. Also, I'd set myself a goal for this game of working with the pastel palette I'd made for this channel. It's the palette I use for all my backgrounds and animations. It doesn't exactly scream Australian grasslands, but I wanted to give myself the challenge of making my art itself overcome the restrictions of using the pastel palette. So basically, trust the process. I finished the rough versions of the first one and tried out another style, but it ended up looking more like a stocky truffler tree from the Lorax. Since the sprites had to be quite pixelated and the pastel palette made them harder to identify, I eventually went with the less cartoony look, which I also think helps with the slight Australiana acrylic painting look that I love. I tried out a few different head, body and eye types on the character sprite before settling on this one. Okay, so I know I said I wanted to get the art into the game before finishing the jump, but I also couldn't bear the thought of seeing marsupial the thought of seeing my new friend floating fearfully in the void. I added a little checker to the bottom of the character object so the game could register if the player pressed jump when the character's close to the ground, and would then execute it when landing, so the player doesn't feel as if the game dropped their inputs if they pressed it slightly too early. It felt pretty good for now, so it was time to add the new rough sprites into the game. It works. I'm sorry friend. That's so much worse than floating fearfully in the void. So the character's getting stuck between the individual tiles since I was using Unity's tile map system, which adds the colliders itself. Unfortunately, due to I think a side effect of the modulo operation, the very last column of pixels isn't set up correctly and the tiles' sprite renderers and colliders have tiny gaps between them. I ended up using a sprite atlas to solve this problem, but for now I moved on to adding collectible items into the game. I drew a quick coin sprite to represent the collectibles for now, since I didn't have any ideas for what a Wombat would collect to either buy or craft new abilities in the form of wearable suits. Coins were a good enough placeholder, so I gave them some basic functionality to just be destroyed when the Wombat collides with them. You can see that the Wombat stops for a bit just as it comes into contact with the coin. This is because I hadn't set the coin's collider to just be a trigger, so it was actually playing out the collision for a split second before deleting the coin. The Wombat picks up the coins as normal, with their butt. Wombats' butts are their main form of defense. When they're under attack from a predator, they dive headfirst into their burrows, and since their butt mainly consists of cartilage, they're super resistant to scratches and bites, and can even use their butts to crush the predators against the burrow's ceiling. I also added a simple UI with a coin counter. I realised that the character's jump height would be important for restricting level traversal, so I made it so the Wombat could jump up anything 1 tile high, but not 2 tiles. Wombats kind of look like they wouldn't be able to jump very well at all, but they've apparently been seen jumping over fences as high as 1 metre. I also finally made it so the sprite actually flips to face the direction of movement. You can see I'd fixed the tile gap problem from before, but now I was noticing this thing where the Wombat would lose momentum as it collides with the ground. which was strange since I was handling all the air and ground resistance myself, and had made a slippery matte physics material which had no friction or bounciness for both the Wombat and the ground tiles. I'd solved that problem later too, but once again I moved on to something else. The camera was something I knew I'd have to get to soon anyway, so I started on that. I started out by just getting the camera to follow the character's X value exactly. Then I added a simple bit of code that just linearly interpolates towards a set point a distance in front of the character. The camera speed and distance offset can be set in the editor. This strange thing was happening though, where the Wombat wouldn't jump as high if it wasn't selected in the hierarchy. I just had to move the character's jump timer from its update method to its fixed update method, since they're called at different frequencies. The Wombat now jumps at the same height regardless of if it's selected or not, and can once again escape this pit of despair. Historically, northern hairy-nosed wombats were persecuted directly by the European colonisers. Apparently over 1,000 of the species were shot on a single property in 1884. By the 1980s, only a single population of 35 individuals survived in the Epping Forest of Queensland. The comforting news is that this number has steadily risen to around 400 individuals over the past 4 decades, since many preventative measures were put into place by the AWC, the Queensland Government and the Wombat Foundation. I updated the camera code so that when the character lands on a new surface, the camera lerps towards the character's Y value. You can see the camera goes up when the character lands on the higher bit of land on the right, and back down again when landing on the lower part. But this thing was happening where the camera would get stuck if I stopped moving immediately after changing directions. I eventually got that working well enough and moved on from the camera for now. I knew one of the power-ups you'd be able to acquire would be a scuba suit, so I decided to start on some basic water interaction. I'd never worked with water physics before and I knew I wanted to do all the code from scratch, so I just dived into it. This was my first slightly working attempt. I liked how the drag and buoyancy turned out, but the character would do this shudder every time they'd resurface. Are you scared or cold, buddy? I also added this death plane which just teleports the character and camera back to the start. Is this what people mean by game loop? Okay, I noticed at this point that the OBS settings were wrong and changed those, so we're back to that crispy quality from before. I tried to make it so the Wombat could do a little jump when at the surface, but I messed something up along the way. Jumping into the water looked and felt pretty good, but running in did this. After cleaning up a few bugs, I finally had the water working well enough to move on for now. It was really satisfying just jumping in and out of the water after spending so long trying to figure out how to code water physics from scratch without looking anything up. Since the water properties work on an object of any size, I could do things like this. I can now trap the Wombat under the ground tiles.
Would I be a malevolent god?
Oh, I'm sorry, buddy.
Yes.
I'll catch you this time, I pinky promise. See? Next I made it so the camera follows the character's Y value when they're underwater. I noticed that if I pressed one direction on the same frame as I let go of the other, the character did this weird slide. I added a check to see if the character is moving in the same direction as the input when checking if they're at maximum velocity, and that fixed it. I also quickly fixed that problem where the Wombat would lose momentum on landing by changing its collision detection mode from discrete to continuous. I then added an escape from this purgatory in the form of an exit door. or a green rectangle anyway. I also discovered that if I landed on a coin in an angle, I could collect the coin more than once since all of the colliders attached to the character can be triggered by a coin. You can see a similar thing happening here with the water. The landing in water checker is triggering 4 times. I moved the collision detection code for the water and coins to a script attached to the collider object so it's only triggered once. Okay, the landed in water message is only being shown once now. That seems to have cleared everything up, and now I can move on. Oh, hang on. Something feels different. Then I added a main menu scene to add some authenticity to the project. After adding these few lines of code, the menu could do this. I added some functionality to the exit door so that the level manager checks the player's coin count when triggered. At this point it just showed text in the console whether the player had enough coins or not. I made it so pressing escape takes the player back to the menu scene, where at the moment they can only start a new game. The quit button also technically has functionality, but the application.quit method is ignored when running the game in the editor. I also made this little scene for when the player triggers the door with the correct number of coins. This is where the newest available upgrade would be displayed to the player for them to restart their run with the new ability. Obviously the game should remember the coins that were collected in the last run and not display them anymore, but I'll be working on persistent data between scenes next. Relax. I added some simple code for pausing and made it toggle when escape was pressed. I then made it also activate a basic pause UI. I made the coin and exit trigger checking into events for listeners on the level manager, but mixed up some values somehow. I'd swapped the on-exit and on-collect event somewhere in the code. The console says I need more coins when I collect a coin, and the coin count goes up each time I walk into the door. Yay! Next, I added the promised data persistence you've all been waiting for since I brought it up 30 seconds ago. The Game Manager instance is created at the main menu scene, and Unity is told not to destroy it on scene transition. When I go back to the menu scene, the game saves the character's position and coin count. Of course, the collected coins themselves still show up in the level, but this was a good start. After a little more work, I was able to get the coin locations to be saved by the Game Manager when exiting to the main menu. Then when the level manager is started again, the Game Manager gives it the position of the collected coins and destroys them before the first frame of the scene is rendered. I can now collect this coin, quit to the main menu, and since I hadn't added a resume button yet, click escape to reload the level scene, and the collected coin remains collected. Anyway, that's it for this update. In the next one I'll be adding a bunch of new art to the game, a few more scenes like a store and a loadout and adding functionality to them, restructuring the character's state system and game architecture, and actually implementing some of the power-ups. I still haven't fully decided all of the Wombat's power-ups yet, so any suggestions are more than welcome. Also any ideas on what the Wombat's actually collecting instead of coins to buy or build the power-up suits. Also a name for the Wombat. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the video and the development process so far. See ya folks, have a good one.